What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Nemo Propaganda here, and today we're going to check out the Fyne Audio Vintage 5 bookshelf speaker. This review sample comes to me from Upscale Audio, so special shout out to them. They didn't ask me to mention them or anything, but they were gracious enough to loan me the review sample. I feel like I should reciprocate and mention their website, so check them out. I'll throw the main specs on screen so you guys can check that out. We'll do this review the same way we generally do. I'll tell you about some specs and standout features that I felt were unique, what the speaker sounds like. I'll try to paint the picture of who it might be for. We'll talk about amplifier pairing. We'll do some comparisons to other speakers in and around this price, and then we'll wrap up the video. So, first standout feature, let's just appreciate the aesthetics here. If you're sick of the traditional look of bookshelf speakers just being in a rectangular box with a set of drivers, and you want something different, my goodness, this is a unique look. It looks very handcrafted. The fit and finish is absolutely beautiful. These are full birch cabinets, and they look incredible. They do have magnetic grills that look great also. Little touches of like this brass color around the woofer, around this adjustment here, which is an interesting feature in itself. These two knobs that you see on each speaker, they adjust mid-range presence. So if you want a little bit more mid-range, you can kind of dial that in. If you want a little bit less, you can dial some out, and I thought that was interesting. Another standout feature is going to be the magnesium tweeter. That's not a material we see too often. Magnesium is a very lightweight metal. And then the last standout feature, you can't see this, but the crossover is cryo-treated. So it does seem like Fyne Audio went to great lengths to tune the sound of the speaker and get it to a vision they had, right? Whether it's the birch cabinet, the magnesium tweeter, the cryo crossover, like this is all intentional stuff they've done here, right? So let me tell you what the speaker sounds like. Let's start with the top end. In the treble region, the presentation is mostly going to be neutral in terms of treble quantity, but it's going to be highly resolving in a way that's fairly natural. The treble attack is also neutral. It's not sharp, nor is it soft and smooth. Overall, the treble is highly refined, highly resolving, and one thing I've noticed with Fyne Audio's treble delivery, there's a lot of texture there. And what I mean by that is when there's a cymbal crash, for example, you really hear that shimmer and that oscillation of that cymbal. There's a lot of detail in the texture of the treble that the Fyne Audio Vintage Fives show you. Moving down to the mid-range, what you get is going to depend to some degree where you have that presence knob. However, with them set just kind of right in the middle, which I believe is about neutral for the speaker, you're going to get a mid-range centric presentation. The star of the show on these speakers is without a doubt the mid-range. Now, I said the treble was highly resolving. That's not a strange way to describe treble. What if I told you the mid-range was highly resolving? How many times have you heard a reviewer use the word resolving to describe mid-range? It's not usually something we do. But this speaker has a very mid-range centric presentation, and there is a lot of definition, detail, and resolution in that mid-range. This is kind of a unique sound. I've only heard one other speaker that had a kind of like a mid-range centric presentation, and that was the Fritz Carbon 7. So anyhow, I digress. The mid-range is very open, very expansive, and Fyne Audio speakers tend to stage very wide as long as you get them set up right. And what I mean by that is I noticed with this speaker, I did have to pull it back just a little bit. I usually do about 2 feet off the front wall, front baffle to the rear wall. I had to pull these back about 6 inches and toe them in just a little bit more than I'm used to, mostly pointing at the shoulders, whereas most other speakers are almost pointed straight out into the room for me. So do keep that in mind. Moving down to the bass, guys, this is a small speaker. It's a 5 1/4 driver. We cannot expect thunderous bass. That's not what the speaker is about. Bass is going to be quick. It's going to be taut. It's going to be natural and linear. It is certainly not boosted. It is certainly not thick. It is not powerful. It certainly will not sound like there's a subwoofer hidden somewhere in the room. Again, you do have to manage your expectations, especially when the drivers get this small. This speaker is without a doubt a low volume champion. And matter of fact, I would suggest that if you're a low volume customer, that's one of the reasons you're going to consider this speaker, right? Can you play it loud? Sure, you certainly can play it loud, but you can find its limit, okay? If you're a 90, 95 dB listener and your room is maybe medium size or even on the higher side of like small to medium, you may find the limits of something like the Vintage Fives. They weren't designed to throw a party, right? These were designed for more intimate spaces, lower volume playback, good recordings that aren't compressed. That's another thing I noticed. Initially, I'd be listening to music and I'd be like, oh man, this like the mid-range doesn't sound right. Well, why is that? But then I'd listen to other songs. I'd be like, wow, the mid-range sounds incredible. What's the difference? What's going on here? And then I realized the more modern songs I was listening to that have a lot of compression, I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but unfortunately, I don't know how long it's been now, maybe the past 10 or 15 years or so. The studios have tried to get the recordings to be louder and louder and louder. And one of the ways they accomplish that is with compression, and it can kind of kill dynamics and such. But the Vintage Fives are so resolving in the mid-range. If you try to play a recording that was compressed from the studio a little bit, you're going to hear that. But if you listen to an older recording, think like the True Blue album from Madonna, right? Anything older by Bon Jovi, for example. Anything by ABBA, especially their older albums, not the newer like remixed ones, the older ones before they were remixed. Man, that mid-range, it is going to sound natural, real, lifelike. There's air to it. There's bloom to it. There's a ton of dynamics there, and it's absolutely incredible. So am I saying the speaker's very picky with recordings? Not necessarily. Compressed music is something you can generally hear through more resolving speakers. Oftentimes it's in the treble region. The Fyne Vintage Fives are just going to show you that in the mid-range region, which isn't too different. Look, the Focal Canta #1 is no different. You give it a compressed recording, you're going to hear it in the treble region. The Vintage Five is simply going to show you that compression in the mid-range region if it's there. So try to go for recordings that are, don't have a lot of compression, I guess you could say. What else do I want to tell you? Amplifier pairing. I tried a few different amplifiers. Despite being a low volume champion, the speaker does seem to enjoy some power. It doesn't mean it's hard to drive. I didn't find it hard to drive, but it does want good high quality power. The Burnoco tube amp was an excellent pairing. The Thomas's EL34 amp was good too, as was the Willsenton R300 Plus. My Kinky Studio setup was decent as well as the Oyaide VX SA40, though I don't think anyone would pair an Oyaide VX SA40 with a set of $5,000 speakers. Overall, we've got a presentation that is mostly about expansiveness, openness, large staging with a very wide sweet spot, highly resolving in the treble region as well. That's what the Vintage Five does. That's what it does. Let's see if we can do some comparisons to some other speakers so I could help give some context to all these descriptors I just used, because sometimes it could be hard. But ultimately, as always, I recommend, guys, when you're spending a lot of money on a speaker, if you can, try to audition it. If there's a local dealer, even if it's 2.5 hours away, make the drive. It's worth your time. So let's compare the Vintage Five to the Focal Canta #1 I used to own. That's a little bit more expensive at $8,000 a pair in the US, but those are about $5,500 a pair in Europe, I believe. And I think there's some haggling you could do with your local dealer to get maybe a little bit of a discount. I don't think you're going to get them down to $5,000 flat by any means, but let's do that comparison because that's a speaker I owned for a while. So the Canta #1 is considerably larger. Let's just keep that in mind. And it is more expensive. Even in Europe, it's more expensive. So starting with the treble region, the Canta #1 is going to be on the forward side of neutral, where the Fyne Vintage Five is going to be more neutral with its treble. The Focal treble attack is ever so slightly sharp in the Canta #1. The Fyne Vintage Five treble attack is going to be more neutral. Despite the Canta being more expensive, The Fyne Audio Vintage 5 actually has quite a bit more treble texture, detail, nuance detail, I should say. Whereas the Focal is going to be more like, how do I say this? It's going to be all about like what the Canta does is it takes the detail that's oftentimes in the background and it pushes it to the front, and that's what makes the Canta number one impressive. However, some people find that to be a little bit artificial sounding or fake. That's how I am. I loved my Cantas for a long time, but that's one of the reasons I eventually sold them. I prefer the treble presentation more of the Vintage 5, where the detail that's supposed to be in the background is still in the background. You can hear it a little better though. You know, you can hear the nuance detail a little bit better though. It doesn't force it to the forefront, right? It keeps things naturally balanced. Moving down to the mid-range, the two speakers are a little bit different here as well, and this is mostly going to come down to size. The Focal Canta number one is a lot larger, so it's going to have a little bit of a fuller mid-range region, whereas the Fyne Vintage 5, it's not thin sounding by any means, but when you compare it to something that's almost twice as large, simply there is going to be a difference. But tonally, there's also a difference. The Focal midrange can be a little bit on the cool side. It's definitely not warm. The Fyne Audio Vintage 5 midrange quantity is higher overall. It's more of a midrange centric speaker. The midrange is more the star of the show. The Focal Canta number one, the treble is the star of the show. That's what it's trying to show you. The Vintage 5 is trying to show you its expensive midrange, and its midrange is going to be a little bit more expensive than the Canta number one. Moving down to the bass, look, this is a simple one. The Canta number one's a lot larger. It's going to have more bass overall, but the Vintage 5 is going to have a little bit more definition in the mid-bass region. That's that comparison. Let's talk about the Platamon. That's a speaker I loved so much I bought it after the review. Let's start with the top end. The Platamon is going to be ever so slightly on the forward side of neutral. Its treble region would without a doubt be described as a little bit on the analytical side. There is a tremendous amount of air space and separation between the two. Oh, let's talk about the price, sorry. The Platamon are $6,000 for the pair. The Vintage 5s are $5,000 for a pair. So the Platamon are about $1,000 more. Both speakers have really good texture and tone in the treble region, about equal. Moving down to the mid-range, very different presentations. The Platamon is even bigger than the Canta number one. The Platamon is a fairly large bookshelf speaker. It's going to have more fullness and body in that mid-range region, but its mid-range quantity overall is much more neutral, whereas the Vintage 5's mid-range quantity is going to be higher. It's more expansive. The Vintage 5 is trying to show you the mid-range greatness. That's what it's for. That's what it does. That's why I have a mid-range presence knob even on the speaker. It's the star of the show. Platamon is more about just overall, the whole sound, right? Moving down to the bass region, again, the two speakers could not be more different. The Platamon is an MTM. It has dual, I believe, 5 1/4 inch woofers. The Vintage 5 has a single 5 1/4 inch woofer. The Platamon will have substantially more bass. No surprise there. There's not many other speakers I can sit here and compare this to, and I'll be honest, I wasn't sure I was even going to do a comparisons section when I was thinking about how I was going to review the Vintage 5, because it is a bit of a unique sound, you know, and I think ultimately the people that like a mid-range centric presentation, you know who you are, right? And I think those people know what I'm talking about. The people who maybe haven't experienced it, and if you're shopping in this price range, these might be worth an audition. You know, they might be worth an audition. It's a really nice sound. It really lends itself to lower volume listening, in my opinion. Again, I don't think these are built to throw a party. You know, I really don't. The mid-range centric sound is generally not something you're going to just like crank to 9500 dB, right? Let me tell you about one more thing before I wrap things up. I did notice instruments sounded phenomenal, especially the violin. I just wanted to mention that. But with that said, we're pretty much at the tail end of the video here. Again, just wanted to shout out Upscale Audio. They provided this review sample. They've shown my channel a lot of love. They let me swing by and kind of they'll loan me kind of anything I ask for, which is super cool. So if you're thinking about making a purchase, even if it's not these speakers, if it's something they carry, maybe support a company that supports my channel. And again, they didn't ask me to say that. I believe in reciprocity, right? They've showed me kindness. I'm going to try to show them kindness. So this YouTube channel does have a free Discord. If you have any questions, you can ask there. You can also use the YouTube comments section. If you've made it this deep into the video, special thank you. Very few people watch the entire video, and that is one of the best ways you can help my channel. When you watch the whole video, it shows YouTube that the bulk of the content is enjoyed by the viewer. It's very helpful for the analytics. So with that out of the way, this review is at an end, guys. Thank you for tuning in. Until next time, take care.